Okay, Becky Pomerleau, thank you for coming on the podcast today. I cannot wait to share your story with our listeners. So thank you, sister, for joining me.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Jason.
Yeah. So, like always, let's start with a little bit about your professional background, educational background, what God brought you through, and where you're at, what you're doing today.
Yeah, and so maybe I'll start quickly with just where I am today. So I've recently taken the role as Chief Audit Executive at Leslie's. Leslie's is a pool and spa care company, a retail company. So just started that about a month ago. But that audit work has been a theme throughout my career. It's been a pretty straightforward path of got my CPA and master's degree in accounting from the University of Missouri. Grew up in Missouri. And then worked in public accounting with Deloitte, then for a couple of different companies and progressive internal audit roles before then moving out to Silicon Valley and working for eBay and PayPal, where I was in some first line risk management roles, as well as the last few years was helping to uplift their Sarbanes-Oxley program as a part of internal audit. But one thing I think has really been a theme throughout my career and what really gets me jazzed and going is being an agent of change and helping to transform processes, transform organizations to really help move people from like point A to point B, with point B being a better place.
Yeah, a lot of people development and process development. You and I are both process-oriented people in a different function, but yeah,
Yeah.
definitely appreciate the controls and continuous improvement and
Yeah.
processes that we do. So you just moved, you and your husband, right? Just relocated. So going through all
Yep.
that right
Yeah.
now.
Yep. We're still in the process of that. As everyone knows, moving is stressful. We're kind of doing it in multiple stages. So my husband is still back in San Jose and where I'm currently in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Okay. So talk a little bit about your faith background. How did you come to know the Lord? What does that story look like?
And honestly, I don't really remember a time when I didn't know Jesus as my
That's
Lord and
awesome.
Savior. Grew up in a Christian household with just wonderful, amazing, loving parents. And one of those households where the only excuse for missing church was either the roads were too icy or it was your summer vacation. Not the entire summer, but I mean, like,
Yeah.
actually on vacation. And that was the only excuse to miss church. So grew up in that environment. So when I went to college at the University of Missouri, I was also surrounded by Christians. I ran track at there and cross country as well. And so that great group of people, most of them were Christians, but one of them, and who continues to be one of my best friends today, was an atheist. And he challenged me to say, think through, is your faith really your faith or just because that's what your parents instilled in you? And I'm really grateful for that because it did affirm for me that, yes, my faith
Yeah.
in Jesus, Lord and Savior, is my own faith, and not just because it's what I was brought up believing. And then fast forward several years after college, and I had what I call a Saul moment where God literally knocked me off of my seat. I would say that I was a Christian who lived my life with God, but maybe not necessarily for God. So when I needed something from God, that's predominantly what I would pray about, right? Um, and so what happened is my husband and I, at this point, I was now married, and my husband and I were in Colorado celebrating our 5-year wedding anniversary. It was around Thanksgiving time. My parents had driven out from Missouri to be with us as well. And I had a series of heart attacks, not knowing that that's what was happening. So it was just this kind of uncomfortable pressure in my chest, something that just felt very different than what I'm accustomed to. And then I did have tingling in my left arm as well. And when I first had those symptoms on Black Friday, I just took some aspirin. The symptoms went away within a few minutes, and it was like, oh, that was weird. Then Sunday morning, 2 days later, I woke up from sleep with those same symptoms. But instead of alerting my family or anything, I went into the bathroom. I shut the door. I sat down on the edge of the bathtub and thought, you know what? I want to see if my strong, healthy body going to resolve these symptoms without needing to take aspirin. Because if I don't need the aspirin, then it's probably no big deal. I'm not sure how long I was actually in the bathroom, but it was long enough that my husband's like, "Hey, why
Yeah.
hasn't she come to bed yet?" And so he kind of called out to me. And of course, my first thought is like, I'm going to have to tell him that I'm having these symptoms and he's going to make a big deal
Yeah.
out of it, which is exactly what he did. Like, the Lord that he did. And so he kept saying, "Hey, if you're having chest pain, you need to go to the emergency room. We need to take you to the emergency room." And I'm like, "Well, it's not really painful. I wouldn't describe it that way." And I did take some more aspirin and the symptoms went away. And we sat down together as a family for breakfast and did a little devotional at the end of breakfast. And that still small voice in my head, which I refer to as the Holy Spirit, said, "Listen to your husband, go to the emergency room." So I went to the emergency room and found that there were some slight abnormalities in, in the test that they ran. And so they sent us down to Denver because we were up in the mountains at the time. They sent us down to Denver for further testing, which happened the next day. And that's when all hell broke loose. And they found the condition that I had, but the condition also became severely worse. So I had what's called spontaneous coronary artery dissection, or SCAD. And your coronary arteries that supply the oxygen to your heart muscle started tearing from the inside out. And that's what caused the blockage and then caused the heart attacks. And every time they would try to put a stent in where the artery had torn, then the artery would tear someplace else. And I was life flighted to the University of Colorado Hospital on the other side of town, where we learned that I would need a heart transplant.
Wow.
I
Yeah.
was, of course, unconscious once they had taken me in to do the testing, and unconscious for a few days. So it's always fascinating to me when you lose this period of time that you don't experience, but yet your family is going through one of the hardest things that they've ever went through in their
Yeah,
lives.
and you're not there. I mean, really, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're physically there, but you're
Right,
not
right.
mentally present.
Just to give people context, no family history of heart issues. You were in great shape. I mean, you guys were on a ski trip. You're, young. Absolutely
Yeah,
no reason to think that you had massive heart issues.
exactly. Yeah. And the condition that I had typically afflicts women between the ages of 30 and 60 who have none of the typical risk factors for heart disease. So this has led me to be an advocate for women's heart health.
Yeah.
The reason I describe this as a bit of a soul moment is because God literally stripped away from me like everything that I could physically do. And I was dependent on a machine actually functioning as my heart while I waited for a heart transplant, knowing that someone else was going to actually have to die in order for me to live. That's a pretty heavy thing.
Yeah.
Couldn't feed myself, couldn't go to the bathroom myself, all of those things. And yet, in that moment, and in the severe physical pain that comes along with that, despite all the medications that you're on, God just gave me this sense of peace. And He's like, "I got this. It's not going to be easy,
Yeah.
but I am not done with you yet." And I just had this confidence that he wasn't done with me yet, and we were going to get through this. In fact, I had a dream one night in which I was arguing with Jesus, me saying, "Hey, like, when are we getting this new heart? Like, we can't, wake up every day wondering, is today going to be the day?" And Jesus told me, "Just be patient. It's going to be 2 months." And I kept arguing with him, like, not only are the doctors telling us I can only be on this external machine for a definitive period of time, but also my family emotionally, I don't know that they can handle every day wondering, is today going to be the day?
Yeah.
But the next morning, I told my family about this dream. Like, listen, I don't know. Was I really talking to Jesus? Was it just a dream? But I took that step out in faith and shared that story with them. And so they put out, a plea on social media for people to pray more fervently. And the very next day, we got news of a
Wow.
new heart.
And so you were, during that waiting period, obviously bedridden on a machine, not able to kind of talk us through what level of acute care that you had to be under. I mean, you're just in the hospital waiting, right? In an ICU, I'm guessing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And cardiothoracic ICU. And initially, and this was even before they brought me out of the coma, but initially there had to be two nurses in my room with me at all times, just in case
Yeah.
something started to happen and they needed to immediately care for me. I was first put on ECMO
Yep.
and then put on that biventricle assist device that was functioning as my heart. And they did, once they brought me out of the coma, and they were the drug induced coma, and they were able to evaluate that I had not had a stroke and that my other organs were functioning well. I was placed then on the waiting list for a transplant. And each day we try to make a little bit of progress to getting me stronger to be able to just be prepared to go through a heart rate. And so first it was just sitting up in bed for a period of time. Then it was standing next to the bed, going over and sitting in a chair. And then it was starting to walk down the hall progressively further. And I remember the first, well, might have been the first time, but maybe it was the second time they had me sitting in a chair and they bring this little thing that you can bicycle,
Yeah.
with your feet. And I remember thinking in my mind, I was like so happy and elated that like, wow, look what I'm doing. And we have a video of this and you go back and you look at the video and even though in my mind, I still have this memory of it, just feeling this sense of elation of like hope. This is like a hopeful thing that I was able to do. Like you look at the video and I look, so there's like,
Pretty
oh,
intense.
what's going on in my mind, right? It was very different. And so in these times when we would have me get up and go and try to start walking down the hall, it took an entourage of nurses because it's so many
Mhm.
machines and things connected to me. And my blood was literally going from my carotid artery out to this machine, being oxygenated and warmed and coming back in through a different tube. And so if anything happened to that or one of
Yep.
those things cold, like it would have been bad news bears,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well, and I think I shared this when you and I talked on the phone. I have our 18-year-old, our youngest son, had a kidney transplant and was almost went on an ECMO machine when he was about 3 days old. They put him in the room and didn't end up
Yeah.
putting him on it, but nurse 24/7 dedicated, not two, but he had one. And then he
Yeah.
had, open heart surgery 3 years ago. So it's, yeah, I know some of the challenges, especially on the family side, not going through it personally, but tremendous amount of stress and yeah, it draws you nearer to the Lord. You have to because, right?
Yes. Right.
You're out of
He
control.
like, I'm not giving you any choice in the
That's
matter.
right.
Right.
Yeah, totally.
What I kind of to it as a soul movement is he forced it on me. And that's really what transitioned me to not just a life with God where I'm praying to him for the things that I want him to take action on or to help me with. That's really a life that is for God, where I'm actively, and I don't do it well every day, but where I'm actively seeking to pursue his will versus my will.
Yeah. So in the context of work, Becky, I mean, so this podcast is really to other workplace leaders, and those who aren't in leadership that want to learn or aspire to leadership. God allowed that very challenging time and situation into your life and has changed you dramatically spiritually. Sounds like a lot of spiritual growth and maturity through that. What would you tell people before and after that has changed in your life and would encourage us who haven't been through that to pursue those changes anyways in our spiritual growth or our relationship with Christ? Like, tell us before and after what has changed. I know a little bit about your pursuit of faith in the workplace and some of the work you've done there, but I'd love to hear more about that from you.
For me, my values didn't change from before and after, but what did change is really living out those
Hmm.
values intentionally and proactively. And so before, my life was very much focused on, because my husband and I don't have children, we hadn't planned to necessarily have children anyways. Like work was life and
Yeah.
our identity was really tied up in our work. And now post transplant, I really genuinely see my identity as a daughter of God
Hmm.
and intentionally and proactively taking steps to live my life in that way and to align how I spend my time and my resources with those same values that I've always had as a believer. And so God led me through some people that he put in my life who were from completely different aspects of my life. But around the same time, both asked me if I would be interested in helping to start faith-based employee resource groups at PayPal. And I was like, what's an employee resource group? Was my first reaction.
So
Um,
what is it? How would you describe that to the average Joe out here?
yeah, and a lot of people I think would be really surprised to learn that all the big tech companies, for the most part, have faith-based employee resource groups. And an employee resource group is very much like what it sounds. It is a resource group for employees of a certain subset of the employees. And so most of the time they are around the protected classes for equal opportunity employment. And so a lot of times they will have started with maybe a women's employee resource group that really helps to lift up
Hmm.
women in the workplace, or it might be around race might be for veterans. So this is for people whose core identity is rooted in their faith.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why it is also necessary is because you have people who, because of their faith, may be discriminated against in some way, whether it's because they're wearing a hijab or the jewelry that they wear, or by their faith practices because they say, hey, at sundown on Friday, I start my Sabbath and I can't be on call. And making sure that companies are providing religious accommodations in the workplace as well. So that's kind of the foundational why you should have it. But the bigger why you should have it, and from my perspective, is because there's really intrinsic value in people of faith and what they bring to the workplace. Meaning, my Christian faith is what drives me to work with excellence. My Christian faith is what drives me to treat others with respect. My Christian faith was the source of my hope and resilience through my heart transplant journey, which continues today,
Yeah.
but journey that's over. And I wanted to enable others to bring that same source of hope and resilience and love into the workplace as well, because there's intrinsic value in that. And so, again, I had a couple of people, different aspects of my life, like bring this to my attention. One of those is actually our senior vice president, general counsel at PayPal at the time. And so she had sponsored their Christian employee resource group at Amex when she previously worked at Amex and came to PayPal, and surprised that we didn't already have this at PayPal. And so when you have your senior vice president, general counsel who's saying, yes, we should do
It's
this and
okay.
helping
Yeah.
champion that, it
Yep.
breaks down a lot of other barriers. And so we ended up starting an interfaith employee resource group where people of all faiths are working together to uplift and support each other. At the same time, we also had chapters for the different faiths so that we weren't saying, hey, all faiths are basically the same.
Yeah.
We're promoting one faith over another. We are really intentional about being inclusive. And so I was an active member as well of our Christian ERG as well,
Yeah.
our chapter within the ERG.
So I want to talk a little bit about your leadership philosophy. You've been in leadership roles for a long time with some really large companies, and also in the context of, this whole event that happened with this heart transplant, and how maybe that you changed as a leader or changed some of your methods in which you lead others. I'd like to hear about that. So tell us a little bit about that. What's your core motto? What's your leadership principle? How do you approach leading others in the workplace?
My core motto, and what I also teach young people or people who are for the first time and maybe becoming people leaders, is it's not about you. And that's the
Yeah.
foundational element of all of the other leadership principles, because if you get that down, it's much easier to kind of coach and learn some of the other principles. And so starting with that as a foundation, how you live that out then is seek first to understand. Don't go in assuming that I know all the answers, or if it's maybe a conflict type of situation, don't go in assuming, well, the other person's wrong and I'm right, or assume why this person is behaving in the way that they are. Make sure that you really understand first where they're coming from. So that active listening component is really important. And how you also live that out is by saying, I want to reflect God's love
Yeah.
at work. And what does that look like? Like, what would Jesus do in this situation? Yes.
Yeah. Reminds me of the John Maxwell. I think at least he's the one I always coined, that I feel like coined this term, to seek first to be
Mhm.
understood, then to, or
Yeah.
seek first to understand, then to be understood. That whole piece of really, really understanding others, where they're coming from, and having that listening ear to just keep
Yeah.
your opinion to yourself, and
Yeah.
understand where they're coming from and how they're feeling and what their context is, especially as a new leader joining a new team. That's super important. I had somebody tell me a long time ago, and I've shared this a lot on this podcast, but it was listen, learn, then lead once you join a new team. And whether it's a new promotion for you, or you're just taking leadership over from a new team. And I think
Yeah.
that's a really, really good model. Talk to me a little bit more about how, as leaders, we demonstrate the love of Christ, not only in the times that are a little more joyful, right, and promotion and development, but also in those performance management difficult conversations. Like, how do you do that in a way that honors the Lord when you have to have those types of conversations, up to and including sometimes, we've had to let people go, right? And that's never a good thing, but how do we honor Christ through those?
Yeah. So it's a great question because there is conflict in the workplace or sources of friction in the workplace. And as a leader, it's really important that you address those up front and don't let them linger and fester. And I'm actually reading Peggy Boney's
Yeah.
book on sacred work. And I think you recently recorded it. I don't
Yes.
think it's published, but an episode with her that'll will probably have aired already at the point that people are listening to this one. I just read her chapter on addressing conflict in the workplace. And I think one of my spiritual gifts is being a mediator. It's something that even from a young age, like on the playground of like, oh, my friends are fighting and I want them to reconcile to in the workplace as well. But I find that when I'm the one, like when I can serve in that mediator context, it comes very naturally. But maybe when I'm the one who has the conflict with another person, I do have that natural tendency to first say, well, maybe this is just going to resolve on its own.
Ignore it.
And perhaps I think it is really important coming at it from a biblical perspective. And I'm forgetting the verse reference at the moment, but where we're instructed to, hey, if you do have a problem, if someone has sinned against you, or if you've sinned against another person, go and
Yes.
address it with one on one
Yeah.
initially.
Yeah.
If that doesn't resolve it, then maybe bring some other trusted leaders into the space. And I think that's such a great model for how to address conflict and make sure that you're not waiting to address it,
Yeah.
but you're addressing it front. And then in the context of when maybe you are having to, because I have been at position of having to lay people off, and it's an inhumane act, but if you can make it as humane as possible,
Yeah.
with helping people under you can't always fully articulate the why behind it, but help them know that they are going to be supported as much as the company can support them through that
Yeah.
transition process.
No, that's good. And yes, Peggy's podcast should be live by now. It's scheduled for April 1st. So, Lord willing, that's when it'll go. I'm super excited about it because there's so much good leadership content there. So, thank you for sharing that. I know you and her are friends. When you were talking about that, it's really that church discipline model found in, I believe it's Matthew 18. And it's, I guess I would say fascinating, but it is the model that Jesus gave us to deal with church discipline. If someone sinned against you, as you said, go to them and go through and then bring somebody else in. That model works in every relationship, in work, at home. And
Yeah.
I absolutely, absolutely have used that at work. And in fact, when I've had team members come to me and are venting to me about a coworker,
Yes.
now I'm all for helping solve that problem, but I'm going to tell them, go talk to that person. You two need to work that out. And then if you can't, yeah, let's bring a second party in, maybe your HR partner or somebody like that that can come alongside you. But that model is, yeah, it's the creator of the universe gave it, and he created us, so follow it.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. No, thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit about the spiritual side of things. Becky, can you share with us what are your spiritual disciplines? What are the things that you do to grow in sanctification and stay strong in your walk with the Lord?
Yeah. And so I do try to start my day with the daily refresh on the YouVersion Bible app. Over time and in different seasons of my life, that morning routine may look different, but that's my go-to at the moment, which it starts with a verse of the day and then some reflection on that verse and then wraps up with a prayer time. And that prayer time includes some guided prayer that they provide, but also prayers that are in my personal prayer list that I keep within the app. And so it kind of cycles, it doesn't go through the full list, right? But it
Yes.
cycles through three or so each prayer session. And so I start with that. In addition, something that I do on occasion, and I should do it more often because I tend to do it when, oh, now I feel like I'm getting off the path of where God's leading, and then I do it. If I did it more proactively, I would stray off the path less. But as an accountant, I do a T account, which if anyone's had to take a accounting 101 class, you have heard of T accounts. And on the left side, you have the debits. On the right side, you have the credits. And the debits are the things that increase the balance, and the credits are the things that decrease the balance. And so I go through this exercise saying, what does Jesus want for my life today? And so what are the things he wants me to do more of on the left side? What are the things that he wants me to
Nice.
stop doing or do less of on the right side? And that is just a good framework for me to try to make sure I'm either staying in accordance with God's will or getting back to
Yeah.
follow as well
Do
for some.
you write that down on the T account?
I do. Yeah.
Nice. I think that's a great exercise, and for an
Yeah.
accountant, that's brilliant, the old
Yep.
T accounts. I hated accounting, no offense. I loved, uh, financial, analysis. You give me a income statement, balance sheet, I'm with you. You get into all the T accounts and the ledgers and, I am so glad that I have people like you that I can work with it. Yeah, it's
Well,
important work.
probably similarly, that's why I've gravitated more towards auditing versus the accounting because I probably lean a little bit more in the direction that you do on that.
Yeah,
Um, Journaling is something that I'm trying to work on and be more consistent with because, like you said, yes, I write it down when I do it. But if I were journaling more consistently, I find when I do journal more consistently, there's just so much more revelation than when it's a passive activity almost for me when I'm not
yeah,
journaling, the more active activity when I'm journaling, even if I'm just writing down my prayer versus it being as self-reflective. But there's so much more self-reflection that happens when you journal than when you don't journal.
yeah.
Um,
There
so that's one that I'm personally working on. I don't know if you have any tips. Do you journal?
you know what? I have off and on, over the years, I have 2. I have a personal journal and a work journal the personal journal goes
Yeah.
back 22, 23 years, and there's been times
Okay.
I don't journal for a year or 2. So, but to your point, yes, and then my work journal has been for me very helpful, especially as I reflect back through very difficult times when I thought like all was lost. This is it. This is the worst time ever. And now I look back, on that 10 years, 15 years ago and go, it wasn't that bad. It's really helped me to, reframe some of those super stressful times when you're just spun up in your head and you think it's just as bad as it can get. So
Yeah.
yeah, highly recommend journaling. And in fact, this isn't exactly journaling, but in my planner, I use a daily, it's a weekly, quarterly planner, and it's all handwritten. And I'm a big electronics person. 99% of what I do, I keep digital. I'm a Kindle reader. I don't have I do have a bookshelf, but majority of the books I
Yeah.
buy, I'm digital. But there's something to be said about sitting down every morning before I start my work day and I'll actually recreate my calendar. I handwrite my meetings out. What are my priorities? If I have a one-to-one coming, what are the points I want to get it, that I want to make in those one-to-ones. So handwriting, that's a ton of value.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. No, it makes a big difference. The other thing that I haven't done this in a long time, but my pastor introduced me to these things called journables, and they are a book of the Bible, and it's a hardbound book black, really nice, one ribbon in it. And it is a one book of the Bible, but then one page is scripture and the other page is blank.
Okay.
And oh no, actually, you know what? This tells you it's been a while since I did it. Actually, you write out the scripture and then you journal it. In the where the scripture's written, it has the chapter and verse, and then you write the chapter and verse out by hand and then you journal.
Yeah.
And, I've done part through one of those. Actually, I wanna finish it even just because to give that, to my kids or grandkids is a, kind of a
Nice.
heirloom, I guess. So, yeah. Yeah, yeah. So I definitely recommend,
Yeah.
doing that.
Yeah. Well, today's the day for you to restart
That's
that.
right. That's very true. When you were young as a leader and starting off, think back to like something that you struggled with and share with us what that might have been and have you overcome it? Have you not overcome it? How do you manage that? Like what,
Yeah.
tell us kind of what that looks like.
Yeah. It's interesting that when a lot of times when you're younger, like school age younger, if you are the best in the class at something or the best athlete on your team at something, they'll put you in a leadership position. So you have in the business world, we call that you have the technical competency, whether or not you have always the soft skills and the soft competencies to go along with it. I think something that reinforces is that it's it's all about me and it's all on me, because I'm the one who has to hit that game winning shot. Or if I don't hit that game winning shot, then it's my fault. As you get into the business world, as you become a leader, you have to recognize Like, I can't do it on my own. We have to do this together as a team. In fact, we're much better
Yeah.
if we are soliciting the ideas of everyone and vetting those ideas collectively as a group and avoiding groupthink or just blindly following what the leader's doing. And so earlier in my career, as I started to become a people leader, I had to let go of a couple of things. One, that we have to do things Becky's way. When you first become a leader, I think your initial thought is, yes, now I get to dictate
Yep. I'm the boss.
or depending on what we're doing, I'm the boss. And you can pretty quickly, if you're paying attention, you pretty quickly realize that's not necessarily the best approach because your employees aren't feeling as valued. Then you're also, again, not getting the diversity of ideas and viewpoints that might actually help to bring different ways to solve a problem that you yourself haven't thought about.
Yeah.
The other thing was, and letting go of that we have to do it my way is even if I see flaws in another way of doing something, it might be better for that employee to try it their way, fail, and learn from that failure. And so allowing your employees sometimes to fail, even when you know you could have stepped in and said,
Yes.
stop. No,
Yes.
let's redirect. As long as it's not going to be really
Yeah.
disruptive.
Absolutely.
Right. I know I probably have learned much more from my failures in life than I have from my successes. And to allowing people to have some small failures, to learn from those failures versus always just coming in like a helicopter mom.
Yes. No, it's true.
Yeah, fixing it for them.
Yeah. I was actually, for some reason, I've been thinking about that very thing lately. And it's so true that as leaders to allow people to have that level of autonomy, even if you don't agree with the direction they're going to take, or maybe you're like, yeah, this is probably not going to
Yep.
end great. Again, knowing that you're not going to allow them to have a catastrophic failure or something that would harm the business, and it
Right.
also shows them that you support them and that,
Right.
and you
Right.
come alongside them and develop them through that and say, hey, what changes do you think you can make to try this again?
Yeah.
I think that's
And
huge.
part of your question was, do I still struggle with some of that today? Of course, right? It's not natural human tendency to that selfishness,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Is right in our sinful nature. And how I try to, again, go back to that initial motto to remind myself of it's not about me.
Yeah.
And that helps to ground me and reset me.
Becky, let's say you're in a, team setting as the leader, you're the formal leader and you and your team are working to solve a problem or implement a change. How do you minimize your influence and your voice enough to ensure that you're getting input from the all around the table? I mean, there's some who are going to give it, but and I'm sure you've had to struggle with this or think through this as a leader, especially with someone who's I'm that way too.
Right.
If given to your own devices, just come in and say, Hey guys, here's the problem. Here's the solution. Any questions? Let's go." But how have you taken practical steps to kind of minimize your own voice enough, not to eliminate it, but to
Right.
not rule the room, I guess?
Yeah. And I'm having to practice this right now to some extent because coming in as the new leader,
Hmm.
and there are one of the reasons I'm there as a new leader is because there are opportunities for improvement. And I need to make sure I understand, well, how did we get here? And what really are those root causes before we get to solutioning?
Yeah.
And the only way for me to understand how did we get here and the root cause is by first seeking to understand and listening. And so I will get the team together, and rather than me saying, "Okay, we're going to come out of this with a solution today, and here's what I think," I will set the agenda of, "Hey, we're here today to try to figure out the root cause of X, Y, Z, and I really want to make sure I overemphasize. I really want to hear your guys' input." But I think a point you were making is, and especially when you're in a hybrid environment or fully remote environment where you've got some people in the room, some
Mm.
people on a call, or maybe you're all virtual, how do you make sure that everyone's voice is being included? And so if I'm finding that some people are contributing and some people are kind of sitting in the background listening, they're not contributing as much, I will just point blank say, well, so
Yep.
and so, what do you think? Yeah, what do you think
Yeah.
about that? What's your
Yeah.
perspective? Because a lot of times that person who's been sitting there actively listening up to that point is just going to drop an insight bomb that we would not have gotten if we didn't
Yes.
pull it from that person.
Yes. Yes. I'm thinking the same thing. I actually am thinking of a specific individual who can tend to be pretty quiet on our team. And anytime that I've said, I want to know what you're thinking, there's something deep there.
Yeah.
So, no, that's
Yeah.
good.
I also think about, how did Jesus operate? And so many times when he was asked a question, he would respond with a question
Yeah.
rather than just immediately, he's God, he's all knowing. He could have, he could have just brought some wisdom to the table, but he helped others think through it by first asking questions and then guiding them to the end point.
Yeah. So I want to ask a question about the specific work that you do, Becky. So you're in accounting, but even I think I would call it a niche within that is auditing. Um, when you look at your work, and I think that God made us to work, and that all work minus something that's just overtly sinful, the few things that we can think of, but all work other than that has intrinsic value, and it demonstrates some characteristic of God, a characteristics of God. And so when you think about accounting and auditing and the things that that brings to the table, how do you look at that as this is something that we're doing that is bringing blessing and it is a characteristic of God? In what way?
The auditing at my level at this stage goes well beyond accounting. It's really across the company and auditing the risks of the company and how is the company managing those risks. And therefore, just looking at kind of through that risk management lens, the intrinsic value is that I'm helping the company to better manage those risks, either by identifying, hey, we have a gap in a control, like, hey, we should
Hmm.
have had a control over here to mitigate this risk or prevent this risk, and we don't. And so let's help put that in place. Or detecting when errors have been happening and why have they been happening and how again can we help prevent them. So that work in and of itself, that's the intrinsic value of
Yeah.
any audit function. But from putting the spiritual lens of the faith lens on it, is God brought us into this world to reconcile. I mean, that's why he brought Jesus into the world. And if we're following in Jesus' footsteps, we are here to reconcile the world to him. And so to help to work towards a more perfect heaven on earth.
To bring excellence, as you mentioned it earlier, that word excellence, and I think that that's so important for all believers, whatever they're doing, to work with excellence. No, I like that. I think about auditing and controlling. Sometimes sometimes it can be looked at as a little dry, and B, some people look at it as go, oh, they're gonna come and tell me what I'm doing wrong, right? I mean, you know that.
Right.
It's a, it's
Yep.
it's a stereotype that's not good,
Yeah.
but it's important. Those are important
You
functions.
know, I'm corporate and I'm here to help.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, and my world's manufacturing, and sometimes the quality person is seen like that. But I
Yeah.
have come to respect and love my quality teams and what they bring to the table to help us get better. Yeah, they're going to be the ones to come and kind of point out this isn't what we're doing well, but let's embrace that and look for ways to get better, to be safer, to have less risk in the business, to mitigate
Yeah.
those things. So yeah.
Yeah. And really how I try to honor God through that is I have the opportunity to interact with all aspects of the business in my role.
Hmm.
Therefore, I have the opportunity to influence them, and I therefore have the opportunity to show God's love to them, and how I treat them, right? Not
Yeah.
coming in necessarily and saying, "Hey, I'm going to get to know you a little bit," and then, "Oh, by the way, have you read your Bible lately?"
Right. Right.
But just reflecting God's love to them and how I treat them with respect, how I value them, how I partner with them to help make things better versus just coming in and a little bit to the conversation we were having earlier with like the leader and the employee. Like, I'm not just going to come in and say, thou shalt do it this way.
Yep.
I come in and really understand why are things operating the way they are? What problems do we have? What's the problem? The root cause of those problems. Let's work together and partner together of how we can solve those and make it better. And I think that's a way that God just instructs us to go about our daily lives. and I can bring that to the table and how I treat people at work.
Yeah, and I think in your role, as I think about my experience with the people that do your type of work, for those that come alongside and say, I have a job to do, and I'm gonna, look at your systems. I'm gonna sample your systems, and we're gonna see if things are going well. But I'm really here to try to help and make improvements. Versus, you get the feeling
Yeah.
sometimes I'm here to try to uncover what you're doing wrong and throw you
Yeah.
under the bus. And that is,
Yeah.
that's the approach that is taken sometimes. So I think that your approach in your work, especially your line of work, can really set you apart as a child of God. Yeah.
Yeah. And in an audit role, you do have a certain amount of power because
Hmm.
your recommendations are once they're agreed, there's agreement. There has to be some level of agreement on, yes, there is a problem here, and we recommend how to resolve that problem. There's great power that can come with that. And with great power, as Spider-Man says,
Yep.
comes great responsibility.
Yeah, well, there's, to your point, there's letters that have been written by auditors that can end somebody's career, and
Yeah.
probably there's times it was justified, but yeah, it's to think through that is important. Becky, another leadership topic for you. Who do you like? We already talked about one author you like, Peggy Bodie, just released her new
Yep.
book. That's super important,
Yep.
Sacred Work. Who else do you follow? Podcasts, authors, like to just develop your own leadership skills.
I've got a couple modern day ones, but David and Psalm 23. If you've ever read Psalm 23 from the perspective of this is actually a leadership guide. And we always tend to think about it as this is something that gets read at a funeral. But I attended a faith and work movement annual leaders retreat a couple of years ago, and the pastor there and his wife brought forward this to say, hey, look at this passage or chapter differently. That actually, God is laying out how we should operate as leaders. And I just felt like so mind blown by that because I've never actually read Psalm 23 from that perspective. And so I actually brought that back to our Christian group and did a session on it at PayPal. And just so enlightening to think of and to read Psalm 23 through that perspective and the way that it talks about thy rod and thy staff comfort me. So both, yes, that when you're encouraging me, but also when you're disciplining me,
Yeah,
right? And to think about when I am disciplining someone, that I am doing it in a way that they are going to come out of it feeling loved
yeah, yeah. That's
and
right.
appreciated
Yeah,
is one example of something that's in that verse.
I
So
love that. I've never thought of that.
encourage to go back and view that chapter through a different lens. Modern day, so Patrick Lencioni,
Mm,
love all of his work. I very much use the 5 dysfunctions of a team in team building activities within my own teams. I think it's really important as leaders that even if we've created this open environment where people feel valued and they feel they have a voice and they feel comfortable speaking up and we can have healthy debate, if you don't occasionally, maybe it's quarterly, maybe it's a couple times a year, set aside time as a team to say, hey, we're doing a team building event. A lot of times things still don't come out that might be lurking.
yeah,
So I've used that 5 dysfunctions of a team. And there's a little bit of a survey that goes along with it where people get a chance to anonymously fill out the survey and then come together as a group and talk about, hey, what are the areas that we need to work on and why?
is
So
is
love that.
is that your favorite book of his? I love him. I love that all of his books that I've read are great.
Yeah, that's the one that I've practically used the
Yeah,
most for
good,
sure.
good.
And then Jordan Rayner, I know he's been on your podcast as well. So I
Huge,
just
yeah,
recently read
huge
his
fan.
Sacredness of Secular Work book and have been communicating back and forth with him on, is there such thing as a heavenly calling? So what's our earthly calling? I, having just recently gone through a career transition from PayPal to Leslie's, found that book really helpful to me and navigating through discerning where is God leading next.
Yeah,
Because I too, at many times, and I've been at a fork in my career, a transition, thought, should I get out of the marketplace and do something that's more in traditional ministry? Is
ministry. Yeah, right. Yeah,
that what God's calling me to do?
yeah,
And every time God has wide opened a door in the marketplace and closed doors in ministry. And so
yeah,
I'm like, okay, clearly,
yeah.
God, that you're making it pretty clear for me. I appreciate that. So sacredness of secular work, really enjoy that. I just brought up this nugget of like, is there such a thing as a heavenly calling? Because I've been thinking, I don't think auditors should be needed in heaven.
One of the things that he said in that book that I loved, because I can, again, I love making stuff. I love going into a manufacturing plant. I don't care what they're making. I love to go in and just see
Yeah.
how stuff's made. And I think, yeah, but maybe in heaven they're doing that. But one of the things he talked about in the book is, again, speculating that maybe there's something that you're passionate about that just it's not going to pay the bills, but you always kind of wished you could do it. Maybe it's you're a musician, and if you could do that for a living, but you can't, so you do this other thing. So maybe, Becky, for you, there's something
Yeah.
that's that heart desire that, well, I wouldn't
Yeah.
pay the bills, but that's your heavenly calling.
Yeah. And trying to dream big about, oh, what could my heavenly calling be? Some things I've thought about, even again, these are just things I probably would not actually end up doing, or being a game show hostess
Yeah,
or a taste tester on a baking show, like a judge on a baking show.
there
I
you
think
go.
that would
See, yeah,
some, some things like that. But Jordan also reminded me that the leadership skills that I'm using in my day to day work and continuing to
yeah,
develop on, and like we're talking about here, like those likely will also be needed on the in the new earth, because to the point you just made, or we're speculating, but things are still going to be built. They're still going to be created,
yeah,
and so those leadership skills are still going to be important.
absolutely. So on that topic, what tips would you give to someone who's just moving into a leadership role? And I think some of what you already said, you would give advice, but let's say someone invited you to have coffee, or maybe someone on your team that's getting a first promotion to be a supervisor of a
Yeah.
small team. What advice? Maybe something you haven't already shared that you would give to them.
Yeah. So I would start with the things that we've already talked about. Hey, it's not about you, and seeking first to understand. So start with those as the foundation. But then also help them understand what their core competencies are and what
Mm,
they're not. I think self awareness is really important, because if there's an area that maybe isn't they're not as strong at, but they can identify that someone in their team is really strong at that, then make sure that they're enabling that employee to bring that forward. And you really do have to tailor your leadership to each person individually, which means you have to get to know your employees not just as workers, but also as human
yeah.
beings. So, really getting to know your employees as human beings and treating them as human beings versus just workers, very biblical.
Thank you. Amen.
Um, and something that you're not going to be as success. You might be successful, but you're not going to be as successful as you could be as a leader
Yeah.
if you're not
Have you,
making that.
Becky, on that topic? And I couldn't agree. That I have a hearty amen for that. When I really began to develop as a leader, I went to work at an organization who was passionate about people and development, and it was the first time I ever took a personality test. And there's a bunch out there, but like DISC and Myers Briggs. And so, is there any that you would recommend that you've used with yourself and teams that have helped in that type of,
Yeah.
opening your eyes to those strengths and weaknesses even?
Yeah, I've used StrengthsFinder,
Mhm.
as well as the DISC assessment, both of those. So I think those are both helpful. And then not just having the team take the assessment, but of course, then bring the results together and discuss it as a team and make sure that there's transparency. Like transparency is another thing that is so important. And whether it's an exercise like that or just in general,
Yeah.
transparency is really important. And of course, there can be times as a leader, there are certain things that are not supposed to share until something progresses a little bit
Right,
further
right.
down the road. But that transparency helps employees feel
Mhm.
very valued as well.
I've always told my team I'm gonna be as transparent as I can be with them, and that, and again, in my background, working with large teams across multiple shifts, white collar, blue collar, and I've
Yep.
found oftentimes that the guys on the shop floor are being kept in the dark on things that they don't have to be,
Yeah.
And I'm like, why do we keep them in the dark? Let's tell them what we know, what we can. There's certain things you cannot share at certain times, but I think you're right. It builds trust when you're transparent. It builds that trust.
Yeah. Which goes back to that 5 dysfunctions of a team, and that foundation is trust.
Yes, yes. Let me go back
Yeah.
to what you said about StrengthsFinder. Absolutely. If somebody looks up StrengthsFinder 2.0, I think it's a very inexpensive little book, and it comes with the survey in it that you can go take. So absolutely recommend, if you are a leader and have never taken one of those, you really should, to help you understand yourself better. I had a team one time, a team of managers, and we all took the strengths finder and then we blended it. Like we said,
Mm.
if we were one person, where are we really strong and where are we, and we had some areas that were kind of blind spots, because it was like, man, there's nobody on the team is, I don't remember what it was, but let's say, but there's no
Right.
one here with any kind of empathy. We got to be kind of careful about how we might approach certain situations where, as a group, we're not very empathetic. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's good. That's really wise advice. When your time as a workplace leader is done, you've got, I think, a lot of work in front of you. You're pretty young in your career. I think still mid-career probably. But when you're done, what do you hope people will remember about having worked with you, having worked for you? What do you hope your legacy will be?
Yeah, and I have the benefit of having just left one company for another company, and what I hope people would say, and what I have heard from people, is that I was a joy to work with. Which, as we've already talked about, auditors may not always
That's right.
you in that light, right?
That's right.
Why that's important to me, and why I want people to say she was a joy to work with, is because then I know that I have reflected God's love to them, and that they saw that I lived my life with a sense of hope and a sense of purpose. And that's what's translating into joy, because that's what Christians should model. That's
Yes.
what a Christian should be. And that's how people encounter Christ, is they're seeing how Christians carry themselves, how they conduct themselves.
Yeah. What's your current, as much as you wanna share, your current kinda situation with, you've had a heart transplant, like, what's that future hold for you from a health, and again, I have a son who's had a transplant, so I know some of the things, but
Yes.
and as much as you would like to share, and then how might people pray for you in that situation, anything upcoming that we can, keep in front of the Lord?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that question, and I'm very open to talking about my medical situation. I'm blessed that not having any issues at this time. I'm 9 years post transplant. The future continues to look very bright. That said, the average transplant lasts 10 to 12 years.
Mhm.
Or the average heart transplant, each organ is a little bit different. Now, a lot of reasons why I should exceed those averages, because I was relatively younger when I had my transplant at the age of 34. I don't have any other underlying health conditions at the same time. And so I do know people who are 30 plus years. That's certainly the outlier cases,
Yeah.
but they're 30 plus years on a heart. I also know people who've had more than one heart transplant. And so that's what I anticipate will be in my future, is that I will go through another heart transplant at some point in my
Yeah.
lifetime.
Yeah.
So I do hope to retire early as well. So because I think my life expectancy is probably shorter than the average. But the first time I went through the transplant, I had the benefit of ignorance is bliss. I knew nothing about
Yeah.
what it was going to be like, how it was going to feel, all the poking and the prodding, and the fact that once you get the transplant, then they have to test for rejection,
Yeah.
which literally involves them invasively taking samples of the heart muscle
Mm.
to check whether there's any evidence of rejection in the tissue. Once you get about a year out from transplant, they can simply do it through a blood test.
Yep.
But I just got this new heart, and you're literally taking, and they're
Biopsies, right?
stopping
Yeah.
your biopsy
Yeah.
of my
Yep.
heart,
Yep.
taking a piece of this new heart that you just gave me. And so the first time through, I didn't know any better. There were things that the doctors would say, "Oh, this isn't going to hurt," and that was clearly
Yeah, you, not
not fully accurate, but it kept the anxiety level low, right? So I do have trepidation about going through a second one, because now I know.
yeah.
So would appreciate prayers for that. But I also have that confidence that God got us through the first time through, and I don't know, will I get a second one? Won't I? Like, I don't know what that's going to look like. But I know that in whatever the situation, that God is going to take care of us,
Yeah.
and that He's with us. And that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. That doesn't mean it's going to be painless. Like, it's going to be hard. I used to think that I didn't fear death because death would result in eternity in
Right.
heaven,
Right.
where there is no more pain, there is no more sorrow. And now I know actually the process towards death can be very painful. Like I said, God really gave me that sense of peace in that most difficult time. And that's something that I just has carried forward with me since then, and through every difficult situation that I've come across in my life. And God really led me through some other Christians in my life, a kingdom coach that I met with a couple of years post transplant, to get to that place of fully surrendering my will to God's
Yeah.
will. do it perfect every day? No. But the way to that life of peace and freedom is through surrendering to God's will. And when
Yeah.
I find myself not feeling that sense of peace, not feeling that sense of freedom, regardless of the circumstances, it's because I'm not on that path following God's
Yeah.
will.
You're taking it back, taking that back.
Yeah. Trying to take back control.
Yep, exactly. Well, I
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing that, sister, and I would ask that, yeah, people, as you come to mind, pray about that in your future, and we'll pray that you're an outlier on many, many decades of that heart transplant. And again, I can empathize with that. My son's 14 years, and we're probably, it's starting to show. Now, kidney transplant's much different. Living donor, is available, would be available. So it's very different, less risk, but still can
Yes.
understand that. And the monthly blood checks and all that, you got to go get the draw every month and see how things are going. So, to anybody you'd like to see come on the podcast, anybody that you could refer to come and visit with us here.
Yeah, I got two names for you. One is Craig Carter. He used to work with Intel and was the leader of the Christian ERG and the cross faith ERG there. I am currently working with him on starting a new nonprofit called Courageous Third. And the reason it's Courageous Third, third being God first, others second, and then ourselves third. So that's the third. And the
Yes,
courage thing that it takes a lot of courage and the context of work to reflect God's love at work. And that's really the mission of the organization, is to connect and equip Christians in the workplace to reflect God's love at work.
that's
And
awesome.
so that's something that God has put that calling on Craig to lead that effort. And so I'm supporting as a board member, but I would love to hear him on your podcast.
Yeah,
The other person is my sister-in-law. So she is an author. Her name is Justine Folker. She's an author. She's a coach, does a lot of corporate training. So she does a lot of like the Brene Brown training, but
yeah.
she's really a courage leader as well. So kind of interesting that the word courage is coming up in both of those contexts. But yeah, would love to hear her here as well.
That'd be great if you feel if they would like to connect. You have my contact info. I'd love to talk to them. And that I feel like there's so much momentum right now in the movement. I call it a movement, the faith and work movement. I just saw,
Yeah.
and again, we're recording this in March of this year. So by the time people hear it, it'll be summertime, I think. But there's a conference that's coming. There's books. I've read 3 books in the last 4 months that are all faith and work related. And so it's so it's exciting. It's a really exciting time. So last thing is just how can people best, and we'll link this stuff in the show notes, but like, what are some of the best ways for people to network with you, Becky, if they'd like to do so?
Yeah, LinkedIn is a great place to connect with me. I've also recently launched a website that I'm probably still tinkering with a little bit, but RebeccaPomerleau.com. And the reason that I launched that website is because I am writing a book about my heart transplant journey and how that led me to a life of peace and freedom and wanting to help equip others to do the same.
Fantastic.
So check out my website, connect with me on LinkedIn.
Great.
Those are the best.
And I saw too today on LinkedIn, on your LinkedIn page, there's a link to a YouTube video you did, I want to say 5 years ago, 4, 5, 6 years ago, a really good talk that you gave, I think maybe at a Faith and Work conference talking about that. So, yeah,
Yeah, it might be the one that was at the Silicon Valley Prayer Breakfast where I was sharing my heart story. I also spoke at Passion Talks in Silicon Valley as well. So probably one of those two.
good. So, good landing page will be your LinkedIn page and your website. We will put those on there and we will lift you up in prayer about your health and also your book. Very exciting. Thank you for the work that you're doing to share your story. And really, ultimately, I know you want to glorify the Lord and talk about what He's done in and through you. So,
Yeah.
thank you for that and for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. There was one last nugget that I wanted to
Yes.
share with as well. If you find yourself in a place where these biblical leadership principles that we've been talking about are countercultural, maybe it's counter to the culture of your company as a whole, maybe it's counter to just the culture of your team or a leader that you work with, keep the faith and stay the course. Because Paul instructs us that to run in such a way as to get the prize, and that prize is not necessarily the promotion or more responsibility or the raise or things of that nature, but the prize is honoring God, and ultimately our reward is in heaven and not of this earth. And so do not grow weary in doing good.
Amen. Amen. And if that is the case, then I would say that person's been called into a dark culture or dark place to be a light and salt. And yeah, that's great advice. Great encouragement. Thank you for that. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Becky, for being on. Appreciate that. And yeah, and your time. Thank you.